Hi everyone, Ezekiel here once again. Alright, in this video, we're going to be talking about configuration properties. That is how to pick properties from your YAML or your application of properties and bind it to a POJO, that is a class or a Java record if you're using Java 16 and newer. Let's get right into it. Alright, as you already know the drill, we have everything Spring Boot project we're working with. Everything is there. Remember, it's always checked into GitHub with issues, right? So you could practically check GitHub issues. Check the link in the description below. Check out the GitHub issues, or you can just click the link and it will take you there, so you see everything that we've done so far. So whenever you want to use in your project, you can just get right into it. Okay, so what we just do, let's just go in directly. So the first thing we intend to do is to bring in the annotation we need, or rather the dependency we need, right? So we need the dependency. So this is me going to start.spring.io for those that don't have ultimate version. So you just go to start.spring.io and just add this dependency. So you can just search dependency and look for processor, right? Processor, Spring configuration processor. Now be careful to pick the right one. So I'm going to be picking 4.0.7, even though it's the same with this, but sometimes, let's say Spring Boot 5 comes out, the way to wire it in may be different, so you might probably want to check or double check, right? So I'll just be safe. I'm currently using 4.0.7, sorry, 4.0.6, which is basically this is like a patch version to that, so which will still work exactly. So if we go in here to the explore, right, I pick Java, I pick Maven, I pick this, then I go to explore. So I'm using a configuration YAML. That's what I'm using, right? I just want to explore to see how the dependency will look like, and I pick it up from there. So if you go in here, you see, all I just need to do is to bring it in here, right? It has to be part of annotation processor, right? That's be part of the annotation processor. So I'll just go in and just copy this because we already have an annotation processor for Lombok. I'll just pick this, and as you can see, it's under the Maven compiler plugin. All right, so let's just dive into it. So I'll go to my pom.xml. Then you see, as you can see, we already have one other Maven compiler plugin. I'll just go in and add path. This is how you can add double or multiple if you have several annotation processors. So I'll just go in and reload. Right, and that is in. All right, so the next thing, let's create a package. I'm gonna call it config props. Config props. All right, so we have config props. Now I'm going to be creating two styles, right? For those that are not yet familiar with record and still stick with the Java class, and for those that know how to use record, or for those that use both. So I'll be using both. I'll actually create two versions so that whichever you're comfortable with, you can use. But I would actually recommend you use Java record for those that are using Java 16 and older, because it's way simpler. All right, let's get into it. All right, so I'm going to create these app properties. Just create these app properties. And what we need to do is to bring in our configuration properties, right? Then we'll have the prefix. Let's use our EBS, everything Spring Boot, ESB, everything Spring Boot. All right, so that is cool. Now let's just bring in some properties we want to wire in. So I'm going to bring private final, string name. Okay, cool. Then private final, let's say string. Let me just bring in IP. All right, this works. Then all right, I think that basically just shows what we want to do. Then let's just bring in probably an int. I'll say private final int to show that I can work with basically any data type you have. Right. All right, so we just bring in int and let's just call this ports. Let's just see this want to connect to a particular details and it has an IP and a port. Okay, now let's bring an object in. All right, so I'm going to bring in an object. Let's just call it security, right? Now within this, I'm going to create my getter methods, right? Rather than creating it manually, I'll use my add getter, and that solves this case for me immediately. Now I'll go in and bring in my public, static, then static class, then security. So that solves this issue here. Then we'll just bring this in. So let's have something like private, like private, okay, string and token. Okay, that works. Then what I should bring in, let's say private boolean. All right, is enabled. Just call it enabled, right? What else? I just bring in one more thing. Private. Let me think. What is probably, let's just look for something that is basically related to securities, token, Boolean is enabled, and user. Okay, let's just say username. All right, that works. String, say username. Okay, all right. Here also just gonna bring in @getter, and that works for me. @getter. Now the cool thing is, so I waited to this point to explain something here. All right, so when you're using this, you have two options. You either use the setter will bind it directly to pick the properties from your properties file and bind it, or use constructor injection, or rather constructor, right? The constructor can basically help you wire things in. So I'm going to strip a constructor by using all args constructor. That just solves this for me immediately. And the same thing also, I'm going to bring this here and just use the all args constructor. Now, as you can see, this is basically all we need to do, right? This will solve this case for us. Now, as this is complaining because it can't find any of this property, it can't find this property number 1, and we need to register it. First thing first, let's register this in our application.yaml. Alright, so bring in the application.yaml, I just put it to the side. Right, this splits right. And splits right, so this is what I'm looking at. I'll just come in here. Now I need something that has, or that starts with ESB. Alright, so now that I have ESB, you can see it's already saying, hey, these things are available for me to use. Cool. All right, so I have ESB. Then I bring this in, and I want name. I'll just call it props catcher. Let's call it, sorry, no quotes. Props catcher, right? Props catcher. Then IP. All right, that'll be 127.0.0.1. Okay. If that were the case, then ports, then I just do 8056. Now remember, we now have security, so security, then enabled. I'll say that is true. Remember, in Spring we're dealing with booleans. You can use true, false, on and off is the same thing, right? On, off, true, false, they are the same thing. All right, it works the same. True. Then I have token. I just bring in some random gibberish. Okay, this is my token. Then username. Now call this username, just put in Z. All right. So that basically brings it in. So I'm able to wire. If I click this now, you can see it's actually saying this. If I click this, I think this is an ultimate version where you double click this, and it shows you that it just jumps to where you're using it directly. All right. Now this will not work because we've not registered it in. And how do we register it in? Let's go to a configuration class, or better still application, Spring Boot application, and bring in at enabled configuration properties. And this takes in an array basically. So it takes in an array, so you can just directly pass in your array and just bring app properties dot class, right? But I love to actually use the variable. So variable this. Now if you check, you see this is no longer complaining. So this works. Cool. All right. Okay, so before we go testing, let's just quickly bring in the other version if you're basically using records, right? Let's say using records. So I'm going to go in and create another one. I'll create a Java record. I'll create a record, and I'll call it let's just call it app record props. So that just to distinguish, right? All right, so I bring this in, app record props. Now the same thing, let's just bring in the same properties, right? So that you guys see exactly how it works. Right, so let's bring in the same properties. The whole idea is they'll do the same thing. I just want to show two preference so that you know which one to use. So I'm going to bring in name, string name. All right, then string IP, then int port, then security. All right, now it's complaining, hey, I understand, man, but I don't know where the security is coming from. So what I will do, I'll just come in here and create my public record security. All right, and that solves that scenario. All right, in my security, I'm bringing the same thing: token, string token. Okay, let's say boolean enabled. Let's make this more fun, right? Let's bring in a list. Let's see how it's a list to play in. So list of rows, right? Let's bring in rows, right? Right, so let's bring this in. Okay, import from Java util. All right, so this basically works. So let's remove this and let's bring in rows, so to make it more interesting. So I'll make this a list of string and make it rows. Okay, So we just have the same property here. Let's make it more interesting, because people might be wondering, okay, so what if I want to bring in a list? How does it work? That's exactly what I thought of in bringing this in. So we're going to change this to rows, and because these rows is a list, there are two ways you could say user admin. This is how to bring in a list. You can bring in a list like this, or use a conventional method. You just come in here, use this, then you bring this in. So this way, so you can bring this in, or use the comma separated. Spring will be able to actually help you map appropriately. All right, so we've been able to bring this in. So here we need to also mark this at configuration properties. Then the prefix, I want this one to be different. I'll call it ESB2. So it's actually different. So let's copy this as it is, and let's just dump it here, and let's just name this 2. All right, and if you check, it will actually marry to this, you see. And let's check the token. You see, it actually checks. And let's check the rows. You see, the rows is actually going. So let's call this props catcher. I'm going to call it record props catcher just to distinguish it. Let's change this one to 127.10.1. So it's just different. I'm just going to call it record catcher. The token is record catcher, just for distinguishing sake. You get what I mean? All right, so I'm going to label this false. All right, so now that we've done this, remember we need to wire this in also. And how to do that? We go here and we just, because it's an array, just bring in then dots class. All right, so we just need to bring this in. Yeah, we just import it. All right, so as you can see, it's no longer complaining. So pretty much that's all you need to do. All right, with that done, let's just go to our service. Let's go to a service to be able to just run this. So I'm gonna go here. I'm just saying app props service. App prop service, because you want it to run immediately. Let's just bring in command line runner, right? That will not be your case. You'll probably be injecting into another service and all, but I want it to run at startup so that we'll just see exactly how it looks like. We'll call this as service. All right, then we need to implement this, right? I'm using a Mac. Shortcut is command N. Just do a command N, and that you can override the properties and override the run method. You already know the drill because we've done this multiple times. Then I've required Axe constructor so that we'll be able to bring in our private final app properties, and at the same time we can bring in the private final, then ESP, what did we call it? Yes, app record rather. App record props. Okay. All right, so this basically works. So in that regard, so let's go ahead and log it. I'll just do an SLF4J to assist with the login. Then I'll do a log.info. Then I'll just bring app properties. All right, and from my app properties, then we start off with, okay, the name. Then I'll bring in the ports, the IP rather. I'll bring in the IP. Then I'll bring in the ports. Okay, that's cool. Then I'll bring in, let me just distinguish this a little. Okay, cool. Then the ports. Then let's go to the next one. I'll bring in the security enabled, right? Security enabled. Okay, cool. Then I'll also bring in rows. Let's bring in the rows, because we know if this is coming, this is also coming. So let's just bring in the rows, right? Or let's just do everything. Security, then token, then we have security, then rows. All right, pretty cool, right? Okay, so let's expand this so that's all right. So we're seeing everything in one line. Okay, so I'm gonna just shrink this a little bit. All right, so we're seeing everything here. So let's just go in and wire it in. So app the properties rather. App the properties. Dot name. Dot get name. Cool. Then app the properties. Then dot get IP. Okay. And app the properties. Dot get ports. Then app the properties. App properties rather. Then get security. Dot get, what's the first one? Get okay, enabled. That's enabled, right? Is enabled. Cool. The next one, app properties. That's a token. Don't get security. Don't get security. Don't get token. Okay. And the last one, app properties. Don't get security. Don't get Don't get rows. Okay, so this is pretty cool. All right. So now that we've done it, let's just duplicate this, so then bring it for the other one. So this is for the record. Then we'll just basically just change all this. But this will change because this is basically a record. A record does not use the concept of get. You just basically just call the property directly. All right. So I'm just going to quickly change all this. All right. So let's just change this IP. This should be IP. This should be ports. This should be security. And this should be enabled. Okay. This should be security. This should be token. This should be security. And this should be roles. Okay. I think we've pretty much done everything we need to do. Let's go ahead and run this, right? Let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to close this and let's just run this and see what it prints out. All right. Okay, pretty cool. All right, and as you can see, it's logging properly. You can see app the properties name, culture, and the like. This is 0, this is 1. You see, everything works as we intended it to. Now, the big question is, what is the use case? What do you really need it for? All right, so this is a case where you're connecting to a third-party provider. This is just a use case. You have a third-party provider that is providing a bunch of properties for you to be able to connect to them. They provide you probably say a token, and you have things like the URL. You have some configuration properties you need to dynamically just change. Maybe different for UAT, different for production, which you're using to build the request you're sending to them. This is a very good way to be able to wire things in. Now, my recommendation is, no matter how large your application is, right? I think you should use one class. You can use multiple classes, right? It works, right? But you could keep everything in one single class and just separate them and have records, right? So you could have records like this, right? And you could just space things out, right? Personally, that's what I would do because I like keeping things in one place. One thing you should do. So if I have this for the first one, I could just give it a space, maybe put a comment. I'll just say, okay, if I'm connecting to say an OPay, then put OPay configuration and the likes. So, right, but whatever works for you. So if you want it separate, I've showed you how to bring it in separately. If you want it in the same class, you could also wire everything in the same class. But what I'll just recommend is stick to one part, all right? It's always good when you're programming, you have a standard in your company, all right? So if you're using properties, stick to this property style. That's for the Pojo that has a class. If you're using record, use record. But if you notice, the record is kind of simpler than having this class bit. Well, for me, but it might be different for you. But now you know how to do both, and now you know how to use at configuration properties, and now you know the use case. So no matter the properties, how voluminous it is, instead of using add value everywhere in all your classes, you have like 100 properties, and your code is littered with add value, like Spring add value to wire things in. You don't need to do that anymore, all right? All you just need to do is just bring everything under a class, give it a prefix if necessary, give it a because it's optional. Give it a prefix and then wire everything in. So you just be bringing in a single class into your service, and it will contain all your properties that is bound in your YAML file or application properties. All right, I hope that has been a good one. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.